Hello, my name is Vasilios Kosmakos with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Today is February 2nd. Who do I have the pleasure of speaking with today?
Yeah, my name is David Moritz. I'm a board member of the Florida Rights of Nature Network.
Fantastic. And so we're here today to discuss the Right to Clean Water Amendment. If you can just begin by telling me a little bit about what the amendment entails.
Okay, and that could be a that answering that could be a whole thing all by itself. Um, the what do you actually give me a fine question on that because all entails again that's just too huge.
Fair enough. So describe the importance of the Right to Clean Water Amendment. Why is it important?
The what
Like,
now? Oh, why is
this,
it important? Okay, well, yeah, and that there's a number of reasons. I put together some of them. That there's the most important reasons are is we're obviously not getting what we want, from the Florida government. We're not getting clean water. They're claiming, oh, we're doing this, we're doing it. We're spending these billions of dollars, but year after year after year, our water keeps getting worse and worse. And I started down this road over 10 years ago when I retired. I was doing, photography at the time, and it seemed like every day I went out, the water was worse. And at one point in time, we had a drought back then, 2012. And, so I said, I've got to get involved somehow. Okay, so I joined our local Alachua County Environmental Protection Advisory Committee, which is as a commission, a board of county commissioners appointed position, just to give opinions on the environment. And and basically, after a number of years of going to commission meetings, going to water management district meetings, going to even some meetings in Tallahassee, I saw that virtually none, zero, not like 1%, but zero of what we as environmentalists were asking the state to do was being done. It was quite obvious that the entire focus of our state legislature and of our state executive officers, the governor on down, is totally focused towards satisfying, the needs of businesses for making greater profits, and they really don't care what happens to the environment in the process. Now they say they do, but I'm sorry, their actions don't they're not in sync with what they're saying they want. Okay, so at some point, it was in 2019, a group of us said, "Look, this is getting too far, afield. We all got together. We met at Chuck McNeil's house or O'Neill's house in Apopka, and we discussed, a plan at that point in time. What can we do? And we formed a group, an organization, as a result of that original meeting a number of months later here in Gainesville, called the Florida Rights of Nature Network. And the whole purpose of that was to bring, at that time, to bring charter amendments to various counties and cities that would accomplish, granting rights to nature, which we felt at that time would be what we needed to solve this problem. Because if a river had a right, to be clean and not to be polluted, and we could sue on its behalf, then we'd be able to protect that river. But of course, immediately, they turned around and wrote a law, wrote a bill, and that bill was later signed into law, which made granting rights, to any kind of a natural entity, violation of Florida state law. So it was around the middle of that point that I realized, well, we're not going to get anything passed for at the county level. We're not getting anything passed by cities. They're just not going to listen because, well, let's face it. I'm sure you've seen it. Our state just loves to preempt anything that comes up that doesn't, suit their desires. So we decided we had to go forward with an amendment, and then we've taken about 2 years putting this amendment together because we wanted one that would actually work. We do what we wanted to do without harming business. I mean, any business that's legitimate doesn't really want to destroy the environment at the same time. They just want to make money, and we're all for that. So that's what got us where we're at now. And we this last April 22nd, we were approved for this amendment to go on the ballot.
So let's kind of discuss the right to nature movement.
Let me correct that, not to go on the ballot, but for us to collect petitions to put it on the ballot.
Fantastic. So, if you can just elaborate a little bit more on the right to nature movement. So, from my understanding, it's a national movement that's kind of been occurring, but as you're saying, it has a chapter in Florida. Kind of talk about that a little bit more. Like,
Well, yeah, it's a worldwide movement. Okay, it's not just the U.S. We're kind of actually late to the to the table, if you want to know the truth. There are a number of countries that now have right to nature constitutional amendments, and Ecuador is one of them. But the countries that have them in there as part of their national constitutions say basically um, that not only are people considered entities, not only are corporations considered entities, not only are ships, I don't know if most people know this, but a ship is considered or can be considered an entity, but also, a river or any ecological system can be considered an entity for legal purposes. This is the problem. I think anyone who's sane recognizes that we have to maintain our rivers, our water, our environment in some healthy form, or we're all, going to be in deep trouble because we depend upon the environment to grow our food. Those that eat meat eat fish from the sea, and eat, cattle that eat grass, that is grown on the land, and we breathe the air. So we have to find some way of protecting the environment. And basically, it's a movement that says that people are not a part from nature, we're a part of nature. So the rights of nature movement wasn't meant to exclude humans and give nature or natural entities rights to the exception of humans. It was a recognition that humans also already had all sorts of laws and had, pretty much taken the rights of everything, including the rights to destroy natural entities at their whim. And so that's basically what it is. I mean, it's fairly simple to understand. I have to say that there's different groups that even amongst rights of nature groups, there's not total agreement as to what it's all about. But I think on the very basics, the fundamentals, we agree that natural entities um, deserve rights. I mean, personally, I think they have the same natural or endemic rights. They had rights when they were created and still have them, just like human beings have certain rights. But we've codified ours. We've put ours in the Constitution. Animals and plants do not have any kind of, or ecosystems do not have any kind of protection in the legal system. And so it's totally about protecting them under the law to where we don't just wipe them all out.
so you had mentioned that there was incorrect, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you just mentioned that the river, that there was legislation that wanted to give rights to, I think, a river in Florida, but then the government preempted, um, put a law in the place that saying that said that rivers aren't allowed to be entities, right? You said something similar to that, correct?
Mhm.
So kind of describe kind of that history between that legislation and then how that connect with
Sure.
the religion you
Sure.
do now.
And let me point out one thing here, and that is that we had a number of counties in 2019 to for the 2020 ballot or election. We were working to get charter amendments on various counties and some places cities. The two that stick out the most to me, and somebody, if I'm leaving out theirs, please forgive me if you're hearing this, was the Orange County charter amendment and Orange County is a pretty big county, and they had a rights of nature amendment to the charter, to the county charter, and Alachua County. We were trying to get a amendment to the Alachua County for the Santa Fe River. Ours was called Safe War. So the difference between the two is when we were all starting out, we all agreed that, oh yeah, it should look like Safe War. But then as time went on, because we were going the route of getting one through Citizens Initiative here in Alachua County. In Orange County, they were trying to do it via the commission, that comes by once every X number of years and is allowed to put so many amendments to the county charter on their county ballots. And with that commission, they were able to put together a charter amendment that was pretty darn good, but it also specifically laid out rights for humans as well as here's the rights for natural entities, here's rights for human entities. And that passed with almost 90 percentile of the citizens of Orange County. Okay, and I hope I don't need to remind you, Orange County is a red county. And I did the math when they first told me that it passed with that level, and there's no way that it got passed without without bipartisan support, omnipartisan support. There were people there voting that day for Mr. Trump. There were people there voting for for all other candidates essentially, and it still passed with that level of support. Okay, and there's no doubt in my mind that everyone understood exactly what it said. Okay, before we even got to the ballot house, it was preempted by the Florida legislature, and it was kind of slipped in one bill, and they kicked it out, and then it was slipped in another bill, at the last minute. It's one of those little midnight things, and it was passed. Okay? And it essentially says that that no charter, no county, amendment or charter amendment or city charter amendment or ordinance or anything can grant any kind of right to a natural entity unless that's already granted or covered in the Constitution. And so before we even finished, we stopped Safebore. They were already on a fast track, I think, because they were running with a commission-oriented amendment. They got theirs on the ballot, even with people knowing that it could be thrown off, and it passed anyway in Orange County. So did that answer the question? I hope it did.
No, absolutely does. I'm just kind of thinking for a second. So kind of discuss this kind of bipartisan support you're saying, right? Because
Yeah.
anything, to hit 90%, that's wow, right? So why do you think it's reaching that level of support? Because it almost seems contradictory, right? Kind of based upon business interests and kind of political ideology. Why is it hitting those levels?
Well, some might think. I happen to be one who doesn't think that way. I grew up in a Republican family. Okay, so I'm sure that I tend to think differently than a lot of other people do. I have some very good friends who are Republicans, and I have a lot of friends because I live here in Alachua County that are Democrat. And actually, I'm a registered Democrat here in Alachua County because if you're not a registered Democrat, you don't get to vote on really on who's going to take office here. It's just the way local politics works because we're so overwhelmingly Democrat in this county. It's like two to one here. So what basically I'm surprised that people even wonder why this is was supported bipartisan. Every Republican I talk to about on it says, yeah, we need to protect from overreach from government. If you think about it, that's kind of a government thing, isn't it? Too big a government, too far a reach, too much control over what we do. There's only a small part, I think, of the overall population that wants to do things and does things that damage the environment. The rest of us want to protect the environment so our children have it, our grandchildren have it, and this earth is habitable by humans from now until the end of time. But basically, the amendment doesn't try and stop people from doing business. It just says, hey, if what you're doing is polluting, and by the way, it's one of these things where it adds on, pollution adds on, pollution adds. There's no one that says here's a final limit because that final limit keeps getting moved. Every time they go back and look at it. So I think we all realize that we need to do something here in Florida. It's not getting better in spite of politicians telling us, oh yeah, we're doing this, we're spending all these billions. They're spending all these billions, and we're still not getting clean water. We're still not getting cleaner air, et cetera. So again, I'm not surprised that we're getting bipartisan or omnipartisan support for this.
So there seems to be a very interesting debate kind of going on. Within Florida, nationally, about kind of this idea of about this centralization of power as they're going, less power is going from the city to the county. It's all kind of going upwards, right? the state, and then even the states are losing power in some regard to the national government. I mean, it seems like this amendment kind of, is able, it kind of finds that balance, right? Where it's like, it gives counties or kind of gives, local people the ability to challenge the state, when these issues are being fixed, but it doesn't give too much power either to the state to kind of, control these issues too. I mean, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the things that we encountered while creating this amendment was that there is such a thing as called Dillon's rule. Are you familiar with the term?
I'm not.
Okay. What it is it is a statement that okay, there really is in the USA there is the power for our government overall lies at the state level, okay, states' rights level, and the federal government can only do so much. Okay, which is why you see, the federal government losing, a lot of cases to states, and why it tends to give up, certain rights to states at times, because the states, the way the Constitution is written, states have that. It was because the original colonies, simply didn't want, give up that much to a central government themselves. They were pretty much, free thinkers that didn't really want to be answering to anyone other than, their friends and, they and their family who they all knew from their, in their given colony. So when they agreed to enter into the union known as the United States of America, they weren't going to give that up. So that's pretty much written into the Constitution. Um, Something else that's there is that the way state constitutions work is that unless there is what's called home rule granted to cities and to counties, and counties are really the only sub part of the of states. They're really like I forget what the actual term is, but they're like sub parts of the state. And cities are just they're given certain incorporated rights, but that really counties can't always overstep. But basically, the county is the next step down from the state, and then there isn't anything else really. It's just counties are really a part of the state. Counties can dissolve, or excuse me, states can dissolve counties if they want to legally, and change them around. And say, okay, we're taking half of you and putting it over here, and then that's it. And I don't even think they have to go to the Constitution to do that. I think they can do it, pretty much legislatively. So what happens is that whenever a county passes a law, since it is nothing but a part of the state, okay, it reports to the state more or less that it operates under their with their approval, so to speak. Um, the state, unless it's granted full autonomy to counties, full home rule, has the right to go in and to say, okay, we're preempting your ordinance, and here's what we want to happen instead. And of course, they usually do it just for every county at the same time. They set the bar pretty high. Now, typically, what people like me and a lot of others think how it should work is really, when it comes to the environment, the protection should be whoever gives the greatest protection. So if the state law, that you've got protection from the top at the federal government, saying here's the baseline that all the states need to follow. And then basically the states say, okay, that's nice in this area, but over here we need to make it a little tougher. And this one says, yeah, that's great over there, but here we need this. One needs water, one needs better protection for something else. And so the states then will make the protections better, and they should have that authority. And then we come to the counties, and even to the cities within the counties. And I think the counties should be allowed to make even stiffer regulations regarding the protection of the environment within their counties, because they know best about the land that's incorporated in their county. But preemption overrules what's right and what's logical to do in that case. And unfortunately, in a case like Florida, where we have a Florida legislature which is pretty much dominated by corporate interests, All that has to happen is a business that's not getting their way with a local a county or city. They just go to the state and says, look, can you preempt this law? And they may even write the law for the state, and then the state preempts it. And we've seen that happen time and time again.
So, I think you bring up quite a few interesting points. One thing I'm seeing, as a creator of the Florida Naturalist Project, right, going all across the state, and I've done interviews from the Panhandle to the Keys, and I'm really seeing how interconnected a lot of these bodies of water are, right? I mean, with the hurricane just happened in Fort Myers, right? With those nutrients, that's causing red tide in Tampa Bay where I'm at, right, 150 miles away. And it seems like the right, so discuss how the right to clean water amendment kind of helps, treat all these water systems as kind of one holistic kind of body.
Well, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the amendment. It's pretty long, but not for me. It's not. But we basically cover every type of water body that it makes sense. Okay, if you've got a small your backyard or something, or on your farm, it's not going to cover that. We're covering any water body that then, goes, is essentially a tributary to another water body, another major water body, or any water body that's covered under federal law. Then, it's going to be something that that it's going to be covered by this amendment. So, and basically, all water is connected. It's at this level, or it may be considered to be at this level. All water evaporates eventually, right? And when it evaporates, it goes back up. Who knows where it gets blown around by the winds and where it comes down again? It either, can rush off through streams into rivers, through lakes even, and then, into another river and then out into the ocean. Or it can be, through transevaporation, from a plant, or it can just plain evaporate, sitting on the ground. And it goes back up and it goes through that cycle all over again. So all water is connected. When it comes down to the aquifer, the water is going down in certain parts of the state where the confining layers to the aquifer, are either non-existent or are weak enough that, the water is able to move through those layers and actually move right back into these underground bodies of water that we have, which we call the aquifers. And though if we don't protect one part of of the state and the water from one part of the state, since you can have water on the eastern part of the state and then one on the western part of the state, and in the eastern part of the state is probably more likely to get into the aquifer via a sinkhole, and in the western part of the state is going to get there through going through because there's no confinement in a whole large section of the northwestern, especially northwestern part of the state, to the aquifer. It's going to get back into the aquifer, and then the aquifer is going to be polluted if if either one of those sources is polluted. Some of it's going to be cleaned out by the by the earth between it, but in some cases we've got places where the aquifer essentially comes right up, and you can see it. You can just it's above ground level even. Usually it's lower than that. The water table certainly is lower than that, but the water table isn't always 40, 50 feet somewhere in that area. You're going to see the water table. So the basic thing that that we're saying is that since all water is connected, and we're polluting some of our water with some really horrendous chemicals, that all water, any pollution at all, is something that every person has a right to be protected from. Our bodies are what, between 60 and 70% water. So, and some people will say it's more or less depending upon what, what the scientists are telling us this week. But, it's basically a large percentage of our body is water. I mean, we've got to drink it every day if, we're going to stay alive, or get it through something, that we're eating and drinking. And I think it's a pretty good bet to say that we have a right to have clean, unpolluted water to put in our bodies, to recreate in, okay, to swim and to fish in, to and without fresh water to fish in, the fish are going to be poisoned and dead, and you don't want to eat them either. So we're having a big problem with this. People just don't understand that or haven't cared because they can make too much money by, just flushing their waste into our public waters. And that's been going on for so long now that it's actually, systematized. It's just, the state approves permits for people to put their pollution in. And unfortunately, the pollution doesn't go away. So every time they say, okay, we'll give you a permit to pollute this year, and they give you another one the next year, or usually it's 5 to 20 years later, we're just adding to the problem. We're not doing anything to go the other direction. We're going add more pollution, add more, which is why our waters are getting to the point where in some places you can't even get near the water because the algae that grows from having too much of phosphorus and nitrate type, whether it's coming from human waste or whether it's coming from agricultural uh, you know, um, uh, uh, materials, that it creates algae. You get these algae blooms in fresh water, and there's algae blooms in salt water as well too, but primarily in fresh water. And some of these algae, not all, but some of these algae actually um, uh, put out toxic chemicals. Okay, some of these cause ALS, Alzheimer's. They've been shown to cause that sort of thing. I've heard cases of dogs, getting into and drinking, some water in these water bottles and dying. Okay, so I mean, it's not happening to every dog, that drinks from a stream, from a spring or something. So it's not that spread a problem, but it happens, and it shouldn't happen ever because that dog could be you or me wanting to drink from that or needing to drink from that stream. So basically, what this amendment does is it says that it should have been there all along. Should have been in the U.S. Constitution, but we didn't have problems back in the 1700s, right? It should be in the state constitution, since the state constitution isn't that old; it's less than 100 years old, um, and it's not. And that right should be to have clean water, and that's as important a right as any of our other basic rights. And right to free speech, right to own a gun. I mean, I can't see owning a gun as being more important to having fresh water. Now, owning a gun arguably can be very important to maintaining, one's safety. You can't go 3 days without drinking water. You're going to die. So, I think it falls right up there. So that's, and based upon the fact that our Constitution in Article 1, Section 1 gives the citizens of Florida the right to declare what their rights are, we're doing that in this amendment.
So, from my understanding, a lot of the, when when the Florida state government implements some of these laws to deal with things like spring pollution, right? It's like they kind of, they set, these limits based on the current pollution rates that are going on now, right? And these rates, are set for 20 years, are set for 20 years. Obviously, that's not a viable way to kind of go about it because 20 years later, the pollution rates are going to be exponentially higher as more people kind of come into the state. So we kind of have those issues kind of going on. How does the right to clean water? How does this amendment kind of fight against kind of that type of legislation or that type of kind of regulation?
Well, what you're describing is systemic kicking the can down the street or down the road, right? And that's all it is, because you go 20 years down the road, I guarantee you it's going to be worse than it is today. Remember that the Clean Water Amendment, U.S. right to clean water, or well, the same thing. It's supposed to be a clean water in the 1970s or 72, I think it was, and I don't bring it from the 1970s, even though I was then. But in that we were supposed to be protecting our water. Well, since 1970 is when all of the pollution in Florida really, to any noticeable extent, has occurred. I mean, if we could stop the clock and go back to 1972, I'd be delighted. Okay, we're so far past that, at this point in time in Florida that it's not funny, and something had to be done. So how does it happen? Well, the real problem is from the state government granting permits. there is in the Environmental Protection Act, which is Chapter 403 and then Section 412 of the Florida statutes. Um, that is a multi. It's really just no more than just two sides of a sheet of paper. Probably can't see because of the way my camera focuses, auto focuses, but it's just two sides of a sheet of paper. And I think everything I need to look at is right on the first page. So they go through and they say, okay, here's what, this is called the Environmental Protection Act, and then it sets up some things, that helps protect. And it's a one after the other. So you have a section 1, and you have a section 2, A, B, C, D. And then and these are all things and ways it's set to protect, okay? And you hit 2E. And 2E says, let me get my glasses here, forgive me. And it says, I want to read this section aloud to you, okay? Because this is in the Environmental Protection Act. This is what's there supposed to, and it's where above it is saying, here's what you can't do. You can't, pollute the environment, blah, 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 in the air, the land, the water. Then it comes down to E and it says, no action pursuant to this section may be maintained if the person, natural or corporate, or governmental agency or authority charged with pollution, impairment, or destruction of the air, water, or other natural resources of the state is acting or conducting operations pursuant or to a currently valid permit or certificate covering such operations issued by the appropriate governmental authorities and agencies and is complying with the requirements of said permits or certificate. In other words, pollution of the land, the water, and the air is unacceptable to the state of Florida unless we give you permission to do it. And then you're in violation of no state law. Right? That seems insane to me. And that's it's one of the reasons why we had to go to an amendment for this. You can't do anything about that sort of, a law. You can't undo that, with anything that citizens would do. This is why, quite frankly, every time we go before, even a county, commission to get something done, their hands are tied. We go before water management districts, their hands are tied. You go before the state legislature, or you go before FDEP. Let's stick within the agencies that enforce laws. You go before the FDEP or FWC or anyone else, and they say our hands are tied because you can go before, if you go to them and say, look, someone's going to get a permit, and what they're going to do is polluting. They'll say, well, we can't do anything until a permit's been given, right? And then when the permit's given, well, we can't do anything because a permit's been given, and here in the law it says you can, and there's somewhere else in here something that says to the effect of that, permit pretty much has to be granted, if it's considered to be in the public interest. Now, it could be in the public's interest, public of one person who has a, financial benefit interest, who, perhaps that person is or isn't, donating to these two legislators, election campaigns. But basically, and forgive me, I'm being a little bit, maybe untrustful of the system, but I think rightfully so, because I can't see how the system could have gotten to this point without some of, this being how it works. And apparently a lot of people, both Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, everyone agrees that, this is what's happening. And, most people say, well, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, we say there is something you can do about it. And that's put things to where you have a fundamental right to clean water, and that removes this line from being applicable. And the way it's set up is that whether a permit is given or not, if the state executive agency grants a permit for someone to pollute or simply doesn't do anything about someone who's polluting, they're responsible. They're liable for that under the amendment. They're in violation of the amendment if that's what's happening.
So you've kind of touched upon this. You've kind of touched upon this a few times already, but but very directly, how are individuals and communities directly being affected That how how individuals, communities directly be affected if this amendment gets passed, and what happens if it doesn't?
Well, you know, anybody who's developing or farming or doing anything else right now, in a responsible manner, is going to just continue to develop and farm and do whatever they're doing in a responsible manner. If developer feels he absolutely has to, wipe out a wetland, which is the kidneys of the state, and it's what cleans our water. If they feel they absolutely have to take a chunk of our kidneys so they can make a few dollars, we're going to object to that. Okay, that's not going to be acceptable under this amendment to do that. And I did a forum here in Alachua County a number of years ago in which I had a number of PhDs. I think virtually everyone that was speaking there was a PhD. I think in fact we had a published author there that was very, very useful too, and had quite a bit to say on the subject. But virtually all these PhDs from one aspect or another, said that I asked a very pointed question. I said, how much more of our wetlands can we afford to lose and still be, in good shape? And I was told none. None. I mean, that's zero. We can't lose more wetlands. We've already lost more than we should have lost. Now you can say, well, we can take care of it all through, water management plants. Water management plants cause more pollution than, a lot of other businesses do in Florida. Most of the pollution we see in the Swanee River comes from a Georgia waste management treatment plant right across the border who just, every time it floods or has some other problem, their containment, areas for their water, get over flooded and, it ends up and they've even tried tripling the sizes of them, but, it's still not enough. The solution is we've got to keep the pollution out of the water in the first place. We can't wait and try and get it out after the fact. We've got to try and keep it out in the first place. So this will help to do that. It will say if you're trying to do business but you're just not paying any attention at all, what happens to the waste from what you're doing, you're the state of Florida spraying a huge amount of herbicide on a lake so you can keep it navigable for fishermen because you're not doing your job to keep the amount of waste coming from either septic systems or agriculture or anything else from making it into our waterways. Well, this is somewhere you got to draw the line and say let's do things right instead of creating more problems and putting more toxins in the water, which is what they're doing by doing all the spraying. I've had, by the way, I didn't used to think that as much as I liked fresh water, I wasn't that concerned about some of the spraying until I started seeing pictures that these sportsmen were showing, and these are a lot of these people, believe me, they are staunch Republicans, okay? And they're holding up pictures of fish that have, they have like these, disease, showing on their bodies. That's nothing anyone is going to eat. They've got these ulcers, all over their body, and they just don't look good. It's almost, the idea of the three-eyed frog, which that was a fake picture, by the way. But, you've got animals, they're having problems. Their genetic systems are being disrupted by it. We're seeing the death of a lot of creatures in Florida because of the pollution that's in the water. Too much nitrogen in humans, too much nitrates in humans, causes severe problems, causes heart problems. It can cause even cancer, I understand. So, yeah, we need to cut back on those things. That's one of the things we'll start to see. We'll start to see our kids not getting sick as early and as often as we are seeing them now. A lot of the things we're seeing happen in our society is not natural for this many people to be sick all the time. For our kids to be sick like that, it's from pollutants that we're putting into the air and the water. And the only reason we're only making an amendment to keep our water clean is because the legislature years ago managed to put an amendment, to our Constitution on the ballot that got passed that said you can have only one subject at a time in an amendment. So we can't just say the environment's one subject. You got to deal with one thing, being water. So that's what we took, or air, or whatever. Um, how it will affect people, okay? I mean, obviously, some people, it's going to cost some money because they're not going to be able to do business the same dirty, way they've been doing it. Other people are going to probably start making more money because they're going to, people that are in ecotourism, they're going to stop having to try and get people to go out on rivers that are, filled with algae, and, where you can't even see the water beneath the algae. It's got mats of, algae on top. You're going to start to see people that are, finding new methods for cleaning up these water bodies. Once they know that new pollution is not going in, they're going to find ways, some really new ways of getting it out. So we're going to have just many people making money to, to on the other end of this. So it's not a financial issue. It's not going to be a big legal issue. There's been studies done to show basically that this isn't create a, it's not going to create a flurry of losses. That's been shown. Basically, what we'll see is we'll see some test cases, and as soon as those test cases, because this is such a well-written amendment that is embedded in creating a fundamental right, it's going to be one that they're going to run a few test cases by. They're going to realize they can't get around it. And so then everyone's going to have to readjust and start to do things the way we should have been doing them all along.
So
So
elaborate.
I hope
So
that answers enough of that question.
that was more than perfect. And you actually kind of went into kind of answering the question I had next. So yeah, so I mean, when I first heard, when I was, when I heard of this amendment, right? It's like the first thing I thought of is that, wow, this amendment gets passed. There's going to be a lot of different places that are going to be, you know, not suing, but challenging this, right? Tampa Bay, in River Lagoon, the Keys, the Everglades. I mean,
Mhm.
Florida Springs. I mean, like, name a body one that's having an issue, right? But you're saying that but you just said that studies have shown that it's not going to kind of cause this kind of fury of cases. Talk about that a little bit more because it's definitely one of the first things I thought of.
Yeah. There isn't going to be a large flurry of cases. Okay, and that's just something that it's been shown. And if you just think about it logically, if there is a law out there that's going to be enforced, virtually every time, and by the way, still, people are still going to have to show evidence that there's pollution. Okay, and they're going to have to show that that there's been a change from some kind of a measured baseline that says here we go, there's this much pollution that's coming in. It's easy to do in point source pollution where you've got a pipe that's putting water out. You can prove that water has got what is higher than the acceptable or unacceptable level of pollution coming out. But basically, just based upon the few, and it's not good enough for me to say that the only cases I've seen so far, which is city of Titusville, and obviously Titusville is interested because the citizens of Titusville are interested because of that's where so many of the deaths, the manatee deaths, took place, and the that is because of all of the pollution, that gathers, in Okeechobee, and then is flushed out, through the rivers. That really, right now, they're more like just dumping canals for them, and so much pollution that comes out. I don't know if most people have seen pictures by now where you see the blue of the ocean, you see the water coming down, and it's like black, and sludge, and it goes in. And then you can see this huge bloom, this blossom, of brown, or black even, going into the blue, that was the ocean there where they're releasing water to prevent, an overflow of the of Okeechobee's barriers, and which would be very, very harmful. I mean, it would take human life if they just they didn't do something about it. So yeah, they've got to do something about it. Momentarily digress, that water should have never been that polluted in the first place. Okay, so if we get rid of the pollution, we don't have to worry about so much of that water going out into the ocean, and we can send it out into the ocean or to maintain it in some body somewhere farther south from Okeechobee. But we don't really have to worry about it because it's fresh water. Then it's not going to be polluted water. Right now, it's terribly polluted, and that went out into the Atlantic Ocean. And that the bloom of algae that was there, blue-green algae, um, essentially when it hits salt water, that particular type of algae dies, okay, in salt water. And when it dies, then it's when it releases its toxins. It's also then becomes food for the for red tide, which is just a kind of another fancy name for it's a salt water type of algae, or it's a different type of entity actually than the same algae that we're used to seeing in freshwater systems. But so and we're seeing a huge growth, and I've got all that data here, but I'm sure you don't want to hear that kind of thing. That would put us all to sleep. But there's a huge number, a larger number of red tides now than there has ever been. I mean, it's growing exponentially, and uh, those blooms of algae, out on the coast, were so large that they shut off the sun, that is needed by the grass, seagrass fields that grow. It's very very shallow. The ocean's very shallow for a number of miles going out there, and it was cut off the growth of the seagrass, which the manatee depend upon, and so do a lot of other creatures, by the way. Okay, our estuaries are very important to the oceans and to estuarine life. So that's why we lost so many manatee last year and the year before. And the year before, we're just losing quantity more now because it completely wiped out those seabeds. Um, and so the citizens of Titusville had a great interest. They passed, a city charter, and that city charter passed, again, something like 90% of the citizens passed. That's a huge number, okay? Um, and again, I would endeavor that, that county and probably even the city is also a red county and red city. But at the same time, they passed that. And believe it or not, after that passed, the city government down, city of Titusville chamber, with commission, they didn't want to accept it. They were fighting it. Okay. Now, I think that should give you an idea of what's going to happen. I think, when the amendment passes. Okay. They're going to say, you're going to have this percentage, this, small percentage didn't vote at all, but then you're going to have a few percentage, that the people who are making money from pollution, okay, they're going to come up and say, we can't do that. And I can tell you some, I won't do it here, but I can tell you the names of some of the organizations that are going to come forward. And they're going to make as much noise as if they were 80 or 90%, because they've got the ear of the Florida public, the voters, the news services. They've got the money to get that and keep that that ear. And so they're going to make a big noise, and they're going to sound like they're 90% when they're really just a very small percent. They're probably more like a 1 or 2% of the population.
So and that kind of goes into another question I have, right? It's like when you look at the way a lot of these kind of governing boards exist, right? Whether it's FWC, whether it's more management districts, right? These these boards are appointed, they're not elected. The people that serve in these boards aren't elected, right? They're appointed by the governor. So I mean, it
They're
seems
all
like the Florida.
they're all appointed by the governor.
Yeah, they're all appointed by the governor, and and most of the time, if you look at the composition of these boards, I mean, the water management district aren't full of ecologists, or it's not even a if you look, if there's 5 members, right, there might be one ecologist, there might be 4 developers, or etc. It's definitely way.
FWC doesn't have anybody. There's one person on there who may have had some scientific training in college, but virtually all of his professional career and all of the other FWC commissioners, they're all like real estate or developers or bankers, and basically their tasks, are their interest is how can we make money, off of our environment.
Absolutely, and the point I'm trying to get at is that it seems like the 401 War Amendment, I'm sorry, the Right Water Amendment might kind of directly kind of clash with kind of the way with the way these kind of organizations work a little bit, right? Because it's like, I
Yeah.
mean, if you have a board full of legislative, real estate developers, right, and it goes against their interest, then that might kind of cause some friction. Kind of discuss that point a little bit more.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, fine, let there be friction because, you know, we're the people, we the people, okay? We're the 99+% out there, who are or not, getting wealthy off of, the destruction of our natural world. And we're the ones who, aren't able to, to go out into our parks, we're not able to go into certain water bodies in certain seasons because, they're so filled with pollution. We're the ones that turn on our water, and it either comes out, capable of being lit on fire still, and or comes out looking, brown to red, to black, in some places. And yes, in Florida, in some places, that's been documented that we still got, water that looks like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, so what? The bottom line is that, according to our Constitution, and everything I was taught when I was a kid, in civics class, basically, power comes from the people, from the citizens, from we the people. It doesn't come from a king, it doesn't come from the emperor, it doesn't come from a dictator. It comes from, the people. And, our representatives are supposed to represent our interests. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that there is a place on all of these boards for people that are looking and saying, how can we, how can we, have financial advantage from, from our environment? It should be a sustainable use of the environment, not one that's going to destroy it. And if you talk, but I guarantee you this is true. If you talk to some people, they will tell you, yeah, it's necessary for us to actually destroy a certain part of the environment in order for us to, to keep jobs and to keep our fine nation and our democracy, keep democracy. I'm sorry, that's just bullshit. What they're saying basically is, that if you fall for this, great, because I'm gonna get richer from taking advantage, of the natural world and natural resources. Well, I'm not opposed to us, having a relationship with nature as long as it doesn't destroy it in the process. And believe me, we're destroying it in the process right now. There's no doubt about that, based upon the temperature that we're seeing and climate change, based upon the pollution we're seeing in our water. There's no doubt in my mind, that it is, and we need to change that. And there will be a change once this amendment passes. People will go to court. People are going to try and do business as usual. We and other people are going to take them to court. People now who are now taking, polluters to court and losing will be taking them to court and winning. And the courts will look at this and they'll say, okay, look, what's a reasonable amount of time for the FWC, the FDEP, for all these other executive agencies to get their acts together, to change it, maybe place people on boards and, and to get more, respectable, real science in place so, they can do things the right way. And they'll say, this is a realistic time, frame, and you're going to have to do this within this realistic time. By the way, that realistic time concept is within the amendment, okay? That'll just have to happen, because we have to move towards a state where the right, the need, it's more than a right, it's an actual physical need for clean water, clean and healthy water for all people, where that has going to happen, okay?
Hmm. So to kind of circle back to something you said earlier, right? You kind of mentioning how, you mentioned, I'm sorry, direct point sources, right? So
Yeah,
sources that really contribute to the pollution of the environment. Well, I mean, it seems like a lot of the issue, right, has to do with non-point sources, right? So septic
it,
tanks, agriculture,
it is.
etc. How does the amendment specifically address those issues? Because those seem to be obviously the ones that cause the most damage because they're from everywhere at once, but they're the least addressed.
Yeah. Well, they're not addressed at all in a sense because there's two problems. And the first one is something I believe we'd be able to change pretty darn fast. And that is the fact that, while there are BMPs in place that, that should be suggesting, reasonable limits, and how you use fertilizers, et cetera. But basically, when you've got rules, the BMPs, when you sign up for BMPs, okay, and with the Department of Agriculture, and the second you've done that, you are now deemed to be in compliance with all BMP regulations. No checking, it's going to be, they do check sometimes, I guess. They check some things, probably often enough just so they can say they did some checking, but they don't have to check. If someone comes up and says this is polluting, they're polluting here, there's nothing that forces them to go out and do, to actually check on that. Basically, they're deemed to be in compliance. Okay, so that's the big problem right there. So we think that people should be required to be in compliance with testing in place. We can't get rid of agriculture in Florida. There is significant agriculture in Florida, and a lot of it takes place during seasons when other parts of this country maybe even have snow on the ground, right? So, I grew up in farm country. I don't want to. I wasn't a farmer, but I grew up in in country. I could just look out my door and I was surrounded by farms, and and I have lived on farms, for periods of time. I don't want to destroy that way of life. But on the other hand, I have some good friends now, who are farmers, and they're not using any fertilizer. Okay, so that's they tell me that it doesn't have to be used. Okay, I'm still willing to say, okay, what if they do have to be used? Well, are there safer ways of using it? Okay, I personally think I'd like to see it gone, but if they can show that there's a way of perhaps isolating the water, just through some common sense things, ditching the water that comes, off, having a larger setbacks, from where the growing is taking place. And of course, that's not going to stop, runoff that comes from, from flooding and stuff like that. But if they can show that, there's reasonable ways, I think we'll be able to bring things like that about right away. Okay. And whether they're point or non-point source, pollution is there's no difference in that, and we're not differentiating in that in the amendment. So, everyone who's counting on that to protect them, they shouldn't. And by the way, even state law doesn't protect people that have non-point source pollution. There's a point at which, when the state is evaluating, cutting back to meet certain limits, it's in law. It's not being used, because let's face it, those are the people that are paying the money. There are, I'm talking about large corporate farming interests are paying the money. The small farmers, they're not. They're doing their darndest to protect, the world, that they live on. They live in that world and on that world. They make their living from it, and they don't want to destroy it. I love them. They're beautiful folks. Okay, small farms is what we need to return to. But what happens, of course, is that, the way more of these laws are made, it forces small farms out, and they get bought up by the larger farms, and then, those large farms just, do what they want to, pretty much. There's not a single aspect of this can't be done, without putting, people's, lifestyles at risk, their jobs at risk, unless their lifestyle is, basically, billionaire or whatever. And perhaps those lifestyles should be put at risk and brought down to closer to what the rest of us are at.
And I guess the last question I'll ask is, obviously sending the amendment is, sending the petition is an important step, right? But what to anybody that's listening, right, what can they do to kind of help you and your mission?
Anything and everything that they want to do to help us, just contact. You can go to our website, which is the Florida righttocleanwater.org, and hopefully you'll be able to print that on whatever you put out for this video. And if you go to that website, it'll tell you exactly how to get a copy of the petition to sign. It'll also give you the names of regional directors. We have like 6 regional directors around the state of Florida who are managing the actual petition collection process in their part of the state. We can use donations. We can use people who write articles, people that can essentially just, if you're in an organization that, is environmentally oriented, or even if they're not environmentally oriented, but they're good people who would do what they could to help the environment, and uh, writing articles. I think I dealt with, but we've had some great articles lately by some really good people. If you know someone who is right now, I'm looking for someone who is a celebrity type, someone to help us get more, news space. We don't have millions of dollars like the typical amendment, that does. If we did, we'd be, we'd be running articles, full page articles and papers and get on TV as well. But we don't have that kind of money. But we need people that can get the word out for us. Right now, we've recently, just on that edge, if I can slip this in, we've gotten support from Maya Van Rossum, who's Delaware Riverkeeper, has been for several decades, and is also the author of the Green Amendment. And recently, even more recently, Erin Brockovich, who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, from the '90s movie, made her pretty much famous, but her operation and what she did, against Pacific Gas and oil and gas was great. Or just help us in any way you can. I mean, just say, look, here's what I can do. And then talk to your organizations and say, look, let's not just say we're all for this. Let's collect petitions as a group. Let's make this part of our function. We feel that the way this amendment will pass is because of, I guess what it's called, grassroots operation. We feel that we, the people, the citizens across Florida, are going to say, look, we want something to be done here, and hopefully it's not just old folks like me, a lot of young folks like you, and I'm seeing more and more, people, you guys, you're the ones who you're going to inherit the horrible earth we're leaving to you, in the shape it's in, and it's beautiful earth in the shape it's in now. It's horrible. I really, really wish it wasn't the way it is right now, but help us, get it right, and start off your lives with a clean amendment, something that can help you keep it that way, once it gets changed, once it gets fixed.
Absolutely. And the thing with that, I'll conclude the interview. If you want to just stay on, I got a couple of things I want to ask you.
Sure, my pleasure.